Today's date is Friday, October 25th, 2024. My guest today is Dan Hodnett. Dan is the owner of Dan's Fish, an online tropical fish retailer with a strong focus on providing the highest quality fish to his customers. Dan's Fish calls out and emphasizes humane sourcing, responsible transit, reducing crowding, quarantine and veterinary care, healthy environments, and humanely shipping to customers. Dan has given talks at fish clubs and events all over the country where he shares his experiences in the hobby and on opening up and running his business. He also shares a lot of insight and behind the scenes on his YouTube channel of the same name, Dan's Fish. So, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, my stressful part is done. My intro is the script has been read. So now I can relax and just nerd out with you, Dan.
Yeah, good job. Smooth as butter, that intro.
Thank you. All right, now before we get into diving into who Dan is and Dan's Fish and all that good stuff, if you wouldn't mind, sir, if you would be so kind, the nice people at Aquarium Co-op have sponsored this episode and are making this episode possible. So, is there one or two products from Aquarium Co-op that you would like to shout out and give us a little bit of why you'd want to call those products out?
Yeah, there's one that's been a game changer for my business. So we have a warehouse that has almost 500 tanks in it at this point, and we have a flow-through system. So fresh water is running into the tanks and out of the tanks all the time, and the outflow was constantly getting clogged. We would buy filters, pre-sponge filters, pre-filter sponges. That's what I want to say, in bulk, and they were had such a small porosity that they would clog all the time. So if we didn't keep up on it every day, maybe multiple times a day, we'd come in the morning and there could be water on the floor. So when Corey released the new pre-filter sponges with the nice big porosity in them, I got really excited. I tried a couple and I did a test. Here's the test I did. We had some tanks that would overflow in 1 to 3 days regularly. So if you have a couple hundred coolie loaches in a tank and you're feeding them adequately, they're going to produce a ton of detritus. And so that's like one example, one of the tanks we did this test on. So knowing that we had some tanks that constantly will clog within 1 to 3 days, I took, I think, 6 of those tanks, swapped out the pre-filter sponges with the Aquarium Co-op pre-filter sponge, and 3 weeks later, still hadn't had to change that sponge or clean it or anything. So
Nice.
if you can imagine in an operation of my size, the amount of labor and time that that saves, that was a not just a headache to us, that was a real economic boon to our business. And so that's my absolute favorite product from Aquarium Co-op because it's made the biggest, I would say, change for me in my business. Now, eventually they do clog. Every sponge is going to clog eventually. I don't want to say it's like, be a snake oil salesman, but having to do it every 1 to 3 days to having to do it every couple of months or something, a big game changer for me. So that's my absolute favorite. Um, the other things that I'm excited about is some of the new foods that are being
Mm.
developed, and Corey's talked about them a bit, so I think I can talk about them. Just there's some really exciting things coming down the line that I saw when I went to visit Corey in Seattle a couple weeks ago, and I saw him feed them to his fish, and just the size of these foods and how they interact in the water column is something that that we're all going to want. Uh,
Yeah, the container that food is on, our first order of it, was sitting in the Port of Los Angeles for I think 4 to 5 weeks at this point. We should have had it 3 to 4 weeks ago. It has been one of the most stressful periods of my time with Aquarium Co-op of having an amazing product. There's actually a couple of new products on that container, but not being able to receive a container in a timely manner or as scheduled by the carrier and the intermodal supply chain, um, you know, logistics thing that you're paying for, right? Um, And it's funny because I'm a supply chain professional and I just said like the most word garbled way to possibly say that, but it's not going to schedule and it's been sitting there. And we also have other resupply items. So we run out at this point, as of October 25th, 2024, things like easy brine shrimp salt, algae scrubbers, and a couple other of our items have run out because, we try to do just in time ordering. We try not to hold any excess inventory beyond what we need to provide high levels of inventory availability to customers and our retail partner stores. But when something is delayed by 5 weeks, like that just completely pushes it beyond the normal like 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 months depending on the product of what we normally have in stock. So yes, to be very long-winded, um, I've been incredibly frustrated that this container has not moved and there's nothing that we can do about it. And also, there's been nothing in the news talking about this port delay in the West Coast. And when you Google anything about port delays, all that you get is everything related to COVID times, right? So we're talking 3, 4 years ago, those supply chain disruptions. There's been no new articles or news coverage over a 4 to 5 week delay for containers at the Port of Los Angeles due to equipment shortages, an unavailability or an inavailability of rail cars to move containers across the country. Like there's just no word about it. And businesses, it's certainly not just small little Aquarium Co-op with our one shipping container at the Port of Los Angeles. Like this has to be affecting every single business that imports from the West Coast, which is a massive amount of cargo volume coming into this country.
Well, I can't
So
wait till that container finally does land. I think people are going to be really excited about that food.
we are getting close. It finally made it to a train, and that train is somewhere outside of Chicago. Once it gets to Chicago, it's going to go to Cincinnati, and once it goes to Cincinnati, it's going to get put on a truck and driven to us an hour and a half down the road, freeway, interstate system, and that will be the most
Welcome in.
glorious container unloading I will have ever participated in. I've unloaded a lot of containers now with Aquarium Co-op, and that is just going to be elation. It's probably going to be a similar feeling, almost a similar feeling to when we launched this warehouse of like driving to the corporate apartment in the rental truck, like the day that we launched, and just like shouting like of joy. So it'll be like that. I'm sorry.
No, man, I hope it happens real soon. Yeah, I can just
Yeah.
imagine not just for the customer, but also for the business having that much cash just tied up. No fun. As a business owner, I just feel for you.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something. All right, I digress. So, Dan, I do always love to jump into people's origin stories, especially for first-time guests. But I would love a little high-level view, though, of Dan's Fish, your operation. How many gallons of water you move in? How many fish do you have on average? How many tanks? If we could spend a little bit of time on that, and then if we could go into your origin story, I think that would be awesome.
All right. So, how many are you talking about? How many tanks and what the setup is now before we get in the origin story?
Yeah, I think now would be good, and then maybe as we kind of progress and we
Okay.
start about when you did start the business, we can kind of go through
Yep.
some of that progression.
Well, okay, yeah, let's do that then. So, let me talk about the origin of the business, the accidental business that I formed here. So, I've been a hobbyist my whole life. We can get into that a little more if you want. And when I moved here to Sheridan, Wyoming, I live in the middle of nowhere. It's a town of about, I think, just under 19,000 people in the middle of Wyoming, about 20 miles south of the Montana border. The nearest big town is Casper, Wyoming. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours away, 120 miles away, and I think that has like 50,000. Like that's how isolated we are. But anyway, moved here, and like I always do, I set up a little fish room in my basement because I always have had fish rooms. I love them, and I was a professor at the time at a local college here, and I was just doing it for fun, and I started a live stream, a weekly live stream, so that I could keep in touch with other fish nerds. Because being out here in the middle of, isolated in Wyoming, I missed my local fish clubs. Like when I lived in California, which is where I moved from, I could go to a different fish club every week, sometimes multiple fish club meetings a week if I wanted to. And I missed that interaction. So I just started a live stream so I could talk to fish nerds about what I was doing, what they're doing, and all that. And then over time, I was breeding fish, and so I would tell them what I was breeding, and you know, sometimes sell some or trade some or whatever. And then gradually, I expanded that fish room to the point where I was producing quite a lot. And at that point, my audience started demanding more fish than I could breed. And so I started importing some fish. Again, just as a hobby. This wasn't anything I was going to make a living at. I was a professor. And then
When you say your audience, were you selling some fish at that point, or was it just, hey Dan, I want to see you work with this fish, work with that fish?
I think, let's see here. I'm trying to remember. It's 12 years ago um, when I first started that fish room. I think at first I was just doing stuff I wanted, and then when I started importing, I was importing stuff I wanted. So I
Mm,
would import an import quantity, small import quantity, but I would import an import quantity, and then or get it from a wholesaler at that time, and then I would keep a breeding group and sell off the rest. It's kind of a way
mm,
to get neat fish in that I couldn't find easily. At the time, like one of them was the drape fin barb, which is, I think, just one of the most underrated fish ever. It was very difficult to find, and I love that fish. I bred that fish multiple times, and so the only way I could get it was to, import them. And back then, I was using wholesalers or transshippers to do that. I didn't have my own license or anything. Um, so anyway, bringing in fish that I liked so I could breed them, selling off the rest, and keeping a breeding group so I could get fish that I liked and couldn't get access to. And eventually, that morphed into, oh, the community really wants rainbow fish, for example. And for a while, rainbow fish were something that I was importing because I have access to a breeder that keeps pure lines and has lots of different species. And so at one point, I had like 60 different species of rainbow fish because you couldn't get them anywhere else. And so I was like, yeah, I'll be the guy that does the rainbow fish. Um, so that was kind of the origin of it. Gradually, it got to the point where I was like, I think that I could actually make a living doing this, which is something I've wanted to do since I was a kid, but never saw the proper business model for. Like I grew up with the mom and pop shop, and that's rough. And those at the time were just closing right and left. Um, when I was doing mom and pop stores, big box stores were just starting to kind of really infuse the market, and it was rough for the mom and pops. So I like fish, but I never saw a business model until I was just playing around in my basement, like I've been describing. And I was like, I'm actually making money at this. At that point, I started keeping data. I kept, I think, over a year of data to get to know my real costs, what the margins were, get an understanding of what this would actually look like if it was a business. And the reason I started that is my department at the college, we got new leadership at the college, and they started downsizing my department. They didn't fire me and they weren't going to, but two of my colleagues retired and they weren't going to rehire. So that's like just a strong signal that you're not going to get, your department is no longer being supported like it used to be. And so I told them at that time, I said, okay, I, I can't do good work. I was a theater professor, and the idea of having to do costumes and props and sets and acting lessons and direct the plays and all these different aspects of theater without other colleagues to help was like I'm not going to be able to do good work that satisfies me that way. So I talked to them and I said, I'll give you guys a year. If we're still in this situation in a year, this isn't going to work out. And so during that year, I was crunching all that data. And I was like, I think this can work. So my 40th birthday present to myself was going in and telling them it's been a year, we're done, and quitting my professorship and starting the business. At that point, and I had, I think, oh, about 30 quarantine tanks. No, I lied. 15 quarantine tanks, about 20 small breed fish, get fried through their first stages, a rack of kind of breeder setup, and then a bunch of grow out or import tanks, which I probably had about 50 of those. They were 75 gallons in my basement. So I saw that the model worked. And I was like, okay, I'm going to expand this and see what happens when we scale up a little bit. So I invaded the garage. I put 79 40-gallon aquariums in the garage and crunched data for another year or a little more to see what happens when we scale. What are kind of the do we get any? Can I sense any economies of scale that are going to happen as I grow? And we did, and the data looked good, and we modeled it out. We were really lucky. There's a guy out in Connecticut, Andy. If you're listening, thank you so much. He's a finance guy, and we had a pretty good idea of how to make a business model. We thought until he got a hold of it and helped us generate one. We're like, oh, this is so much better. But anyway, it looked like it would work. So at that point, we launched the effort to get the warehouse going, and we started with a little bit over. I think it was like 467 tanks, and now we're adding another row, so that'll bring us up to like I think it's 497 or something like that. So
And
that's the
are
scale.
you primarily what 40 breeders I see
Yeah,
behind you?
it's there's 40 70-gallon aquariums that we kept from the basement along the back wall. All the rest are 40-gallon breeders.
Hmm. And so sourcing those, did you reach out directly to say Aqueon, or was this just pillaging? Because I mean, you're in Sheridan, so you can't really pillage too many Petcos during the dollar a gallon sale.
Yeah,
You'd be driving all over the mountain
yeah,
northwest.
we ordered a couple big semis full of aquariums at
Okay.
once. Yeah, yep.
Okay. And they were fairly was that a difficult conversation to have, or were they fairly receptive
No,
to that
I had
order?
had an account with the company that owns
Oh,
Aqueon for quite a while and done
gotcha. So
business with
central,
them.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay.
And so um, now for these 30 gallons that we're setting up, that's not enough to do an order like that. So we have I'm friends with the folks at the local Petco that run the fish area, and they were nice enough to order those in for us. And they're actually cheaper from Petco retail at the half off month sale than I can get them from Aqueon. Slightly, very slightly,
Yep.
but it works out
Yeah.
better for me.
I've talked in person with an Aqueon rep. Corey's had conversations with them, and you know, some of the pricing, like they're really putting the mom and pop small business owner independent shops behind the eight ball with how they do pricing and how um, you know investor backed larger corporations, and this is not a eat the rich episode or anything like that, but it's just a very, very unfair playing field that a mom and pop shop has where, places like Chewy just absolutely demolish any margin whatsoever that might be in a product. And it's incredibly difficult when you have a customer that comes in that wants to buy something and they're price shopping, and you're off by 20 or 30% in terms of Chewy being cheaper. Like it's not even fair because they're selling something. I've actually purchased things for us to sell because Chewy is somehow able to get it cheaper. Not co-op products. These are just other brands that you get through normal channels of distribution. You can get it cheaper as a consumer buying it from Chewy than an actual authorized wholesale account can get from a distributor. Is just borderline criminal. I don't know. Doesn't seem right. Doesn't feel right.
This is one reason I admire the co-op so much. Guys, I'm a fanboy. I have a link at dansfish.com sending people to the co-op. That's how much I appreciate what they do. And Corey's nice enough to send people back to me as well. But one reason I'm such a fan is seeing how you guys have been able to launch products for people that I think, from what I've experienced with the sponge filters and the pre-filter sponges and some other products I've got that I like better than what's available. You've been able to do that in a market where volume is king, um, and there's massive distributors like you were just talking about that you can get good deals from them if you're doing massive volumes. But you're right, the small shop like Aquarium Co-op size, that's not going to happen. So the way you guys circumvented that and found a different pathway um, in a market where volume is king, I think it's awesome. I love the David and Goliath story there. So
Yeah, I mean, I want to get right back to you, but I would say it's just, to me, it's got more of that like artisanal craft approach to it, where we're gonna make the best brisket that we can, and we're gonna run out by 1 o'clock versus being able to go somewhere that's just mass producing. I don't know. I got brisket on the mind. I like
Dang it,
eating
you made me
brisket.
hungry.
But like that kind of analogy of we're gonna have a different kind of philosophy and approach. And Corey generally wants to improve the hobby. I completely am on board and support that mission that we have. And being able to direct people to you. Actually, I got my neighbor. So I have a new neighbor since I moved to Lexington, Kentucky. She's a biology teacher, and I think her husband, I told him what I did very vaguely, and I think he told her I did something different. But we were talking, power went out, neighbors were talking. I let her borrow some juice from the generator, let them run an extension cord, and she said that her tank recently crashed and she needed to buy fish. I'm like, well, Dan's Fish, I haven't bought personally from him, but I know that we've done business with him. We partner with him, and it is like the best place that you can go to buy fish online. And that was kind of it. She's like, okay, I'll check it out. Most of the time when somebody says I'll check it out, you never hear back. But she came up to me a couple days ago. She stopped me as I was pulling out of the driveway and said, "Thank you so much. I got the fish from Dan's Fish. They all arrived alive. We got angelfish. We got this and that for their classroom tank." I was like, "Oh, that's phenomenal." I'm like, "I'm going to talk to Dan here in a little bit. So that's great. I'm going to tell him that I got him a customer in Kentucky."
All
Woohoo.
right. More of that, Randy. More of that.
Yeah. Hey, no problem, man. No problem. And at some point, we're going to get into the fish that you carry. And hopefully that's just going to spice everybody up that's listening to this to want to go and check out what you have. Because you got some sweet, sweet, sweet choice fish. So back to
All
you,
right.
good sir.
Where do you want me to go? Do you want me to go right into that? Guide me, Sensei.
Let's see.
Guide me.
So I think we digressed hard at the semi trailer of your
Yeah.
aquariums. You got a butt ton of 40 breeders there. Um, I guess how many fish at any given time do you have right now, or livestock, I
I
should say?
don't know. Like individual fish, I don't know. Um,
Could you swag it?
we, I know. Yeah, I don't know. Um, we don't. That's not a. We don't track the number of individual fish. What we do track very carefully, because we should get into why I'm doing this. We have a mission, which is
Sure.
we're trying to basically make this industry a kinder, gentler place for fish, and make it so customers receive fish that they're actually successful with. And so, what we track intensely is loss rates, all throughout the chain, from when our suppliers get them to they get to us, to what we lose while they're here, to how it goes for the customer. So we track all that. And without getting into specifics, we've improved things here to the point that we're well under half the industry average when it comes to losses. My goal is a little nutty, but it's less than 5% losses across the entire thing is what I want. And so we're working very hard with suppliers to make sure that on on that end of things, the fish are packaged properly. They're not overcrowded. We're gaining a lot of data on fish health and what diseases fish come in with and all that. And as we get more and more of that, we send that back to the suppliers so they know what the fish have that they didn't realize they come in with. Um, and so, what we're trying to do here is just improve that whole thing. What I saw over and over, I've been keeping fish since I was in junior high school. And what I saw over and over was people would come over, see I'd have fish, and they would say, "Oh yeah, I used to keep fish, but they all died." And that was the narrative that I heard just repeatedly over the years. And so I also worked in the fish industry at little mom and pops, at large distributors, and I got a sense of why that's happening. And it's really a supply chain issue. That's what it boils down to. So when I was in my basement playing around and saw that the business was working, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be the change that I've been wanting to see for decades. I'm gonna figure out a way to get fish to people so that the customers actually have fish that thrive for them long term. And I know in order to do that, I'm gonna have to send them to a customer in a certain way. So that was one of the first things I cracked was our shipping methods. How do we get it so we can ship fish to customers, and they get there in good shape, like repeatedly. I think our 12 months.
Yeah, and Corey has praised how you ship livestock and how you've got it figured out.
It's so important to us. Like the metric we track the most is customer problems. And so far
Okay.
for the 12-month running total, we're at 98 point, I think it's 98.97% success rate, meaning that percentage of the fish that we've sent to our customers, the customers got them, they've been alive, and the customer's been happy with them. Like, oh, these are healthy.
Phenomenal.
Um, it's
That's
not
phenomenal.
perfect, and it never will be with livestock, but that's what we're trying to do. So those are you asked how many individual fish we have. I don't know. What I'm tracking is, and one day I'll get to the point where I can easily pull that report. Um, we're constantly building new software. My business partner is a software engineer, so it's very helpful. Um, but right now, what we're concerned about is what are the losses throughout the whole process, and where do we need to focus to minimize those? So that I know.
Yeah.
I know how many species I have available for sale. I can look that up. I know the dollar amount of the inventory currently available for sale. I can look that up. But I couldn't tell you how many individual fish. I just don't know.
Well, whenever I start rambling on, if you want to look up how many species you have available, that would be fascinating. Has anyone ever drawn a comparison that you're kind of the customer or the second half of the supply chain to like a Project Piaba? Because Project Piaba has that same kind of mission statement, but from the source of collecting the fish through that supply chain to the wholesaler in the States or to Europe, right? And I think maybe to an extent that's kind of like where Project Piaba's influence is going to end, right? Once it gets to that, stateside or European side wholesaler. But then you're taking it from that wholesaler or the breeder in some cases. I think you probably source directly from breeders to the actual end customer, and you have like that same kind of mission statement. You're just in a different part of that supply chain than a Project Piaba.
So Project Piaba was part of the inspiration for this. I saw what they were trying to do, which is preserve habitat by using a natural resource that is renewable, and that through the use
Hmm.
of that natural resource, they will be able to incentivize habitat conservation. And um, and then part of that, something that Dr. Tim Miller Morgan's been working on a lot, is okay, how do we make it so that those fish that are collected down in Brazil um, are make it to the United States successfully healthy, so that there's a market for them, so people will buy them. And so that was part of the inspiration, was just seeing that effort. Um, I don't know if anyone's like made the comparison you just did. You have a beautiful mind, Randy. but
I don't know if I would say that, but thank you, sir. I
but
appreciate
um
it.
but seeing that effort was part of the inspiration for sure. So I looked up. Right now we have 289 items available. It ranges from about that to about 350 when we're at our peak. It just depends on inventory cycles and in.
Yeah, 289 to 350, that feels like a very healthy
Oh yeah.
selection of fish and, invertebrates, snails, to be able to purchase at any given time. Now, I was wondering because I was perusing your site, and I just set up the office tank, my little
Uh huh.
office tank behind me here that you see planted with a bunch of various crypts, and I got my little easy flow back there. So I wanted to do something fairly simple and do white clouds again, just kind of your standard run of the mill white clouds, no long fin, no gold form, just regular guys.
Hmm.
Tenictes albanese,
Yeah.
is that right? Um, and I really enjoyed having those in my fish room. Um, and I was checking on your website, and you didn't have that variety available at the time, but you did have. I think you've got the long fin and the yellow, which are beautiful fish. And then it made me wonder, how much does it grind your gears? Maybe it doesn't grind your gears. I don't know. Peter Griffin term here. When with the large selection that you have, when somebody's like, "Oh, but do you have this one?" And you're like, "Not right now, but I do have all these other awesome ones."
No, it doesn't upset me at all. In fact, I rely on that a little bit. So if you go to the website and there's a fish on there that we're out of that you want, you can click the green Add to Wish List button, and that helps me order.
Mm,
So if there's a ton of people that want regular white clouds, um, then I'm like, oh geez, I better focus on getting some of those. Usually I don't. Usually I focus
Yeah.
on the harder to find ones, the long fins, the golds, and things like that, because you can find a regular white cloud at any big box store. Um,
Hmm.
but when the wish list tells me,
But I want the healthy
well,
ones from you, though. I don't want them
well,
from the
this
big
is this
box
has been a
store, Dan.
revelation. Okay, so you just hit on a point that only in the last several months have we really been understanding here at Dan's Fish. When I launched this business, I thought I'd be the guy where you came for stuff that you couldn't find other places. And that was a great place to start. But we have got constant requests for fish like rummy nose tetras, cardinal tetras,
Hmm.
celestial pearl danios, um, Pseudomuga luminatus. There's these fish that are really common in the hobby, but that people have a hard time having success with. And I know why, because I know the
Hmm.
supply chain. And so a while ago, we started doing cardinal tetras like what, twice a year. We'd bring in a few, and customers were having success. And one of my favorite stories is there's a customer down in Texas that had tried cardinal tetras many times and always failed. And he mentioned that on a live stream. This is part of why I started doing them. I I brought in just a few, and I was like, I'm going to get you cardinal tetras that you'll succeed. So I brought him a few, and I was like, okay, try these. If there's any problems, I'll refund your money for the fish and the shipping and everything. I want you to be successful. I've done the work and had these long enough. They're going to be fine. And he got them, and finally had success with them. And so we gradually got more and more demand for those I don't want to call them simple, for those fish that you can get anywhere,
Classic.
classic
The
fish
classic
that
fish.
you can get
Yeah.
anywhere, but that often struggle, rummy nose, cardinals, and all those. And so
Hmm.
we've leaned into that a little bit, and we found that that's also a big part of our market. It's not just rare plecos and rainbow fish and guppy, not so much gobies. Guppies aren't rare. Some strains are, and stuff like that. But it's also like, who knew that Cardinal Tetras would be one of our top 5 sellers every month? I had no intention of that. So I think the word has got out enough that people are like, I really want silver tip tetras from you, which I didn't expect.
Yeah.
So that's something we're leaning into a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think maybe it's as more people become informed of, if you buy fish at a big box store, if you're not set up to properly quarantine them and to medicate and to kind of sit on them, your chances are going to be diminished. So maybe it's just better you go with spend more money and go to a reputable source that basically shows you here's all the things, being as transparent as you can be, of what's going to happen. It's going to potentially cost you a little bit more, right? You get what you pay for, but you're going to be successful, right? And at the end of the day, a cardinal tetra is still just a mind-blowingly amazing fish, and a rummy nose tetra is a mind-blowing amazing fish. We're just kind of numb to it because we've been in the hobby for so long, or you've seen so many fish that you always want to see like what's that next thing. But I think just the allure of like the white clouds, it's like, man, that's just a bulletproof little fish that's got great little personality and is easy to breed and is going to do fine. Like that's an awesome fish. And that doesn't mean I don't have the itch for more exotic stuff still, and to try to play with things that are going to be more difficult and advanced. But I think there's always going to be the market for the classic ones, right? Which is why they are the classics. And then if you can capitalize on, well, I know how to do fish right. Maybe I'll be one of the guys that people can come to online. And I'm digressing in this little statement here, but doing the retail partner program with Aquarium Co-op, expanding it from basically one or two stores that we started with, right? Alexa in Badfish, Kangley with Twin City Guppies, to I think we're approaching 190 stores right now across the country that sell our stuff. The number of stores that have applied and that we
Yeah.
don't let them on board because they don't have a quarantine process, or the reviews, they have combative owners that fight with customers and they won't give refunds when, for all intents and purposes, it sounds like you should just refund them the money and move along, sir. Like it's just not a good local experience. There's a and like right now, Lexington, 300,000 people in Lexington, Kentucky, where Aquarium Co-op now has the warehouse. There isn't a good fish store, I think, until we go an hour and a half away to either Cincinnati or Louisville. There's nothing in this metro area of 300,000 people that is quality fish. It's a bummer. Like I want to pop up a little Lexington Co-op just so I can get my healthy fish fix again. But no, I think it's super important, and I think that I hope that you're incredibly successful with it, and that you are able to provide just bread and butter awesome fish in addition to
Yeah,
your normal
it's
offerings.
creeping that way. So we've now got, I don't know, 8 or 9 species that are in that category that we're like Harlequin rasboras. Who knew people would want them? So like you can get a lot of these fish. I looked at it the other day. I can get cardinal tetras for $2.99 at Petco. I have to, in order to get them so they're shipped less densely and they've been treated right along the supply chain, go through our quarantine process, get examined in our diagnostic labs and all that. In order to get the fish that I know is going to be bulletproof for a customer, I think I have to charge something like $8 for that fish. It's a huge spread, and that's why I did not think that that would be my market. But it turns out
Hmm.
people don't want to buy sick fish, duh. And
Yeah.
if they have to pay more to get ones that are healthy, it's like, whatever, just don't give me fish that'll die. You mentioned quarantine.
Right.
I've always known quarantine was important, and I've always done it. But I didn't realize how important it was until several months ago when we actually built our fish diagnostic lab in house. Up till then, we would work with aquatic vets that we had on retainer, and if something was struggling, we'd mail them some, or we'd work with the lab, the what is it, Washington Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab up in Washington, in Seattle, and get them diagnosed. But last spring, we built our own lab here, and what we found as we examine the fish that come in and examine them before they go out to customers and stuff is that maybe out of and tens of thousands of fish over the last, call it 6 to 9 months, maybe 5 have come in without anything. Like everything comes in with something. It could be a simple tapeworm. It could be a fluke. It could be, but everything has something. It's really biological organisms are not sterile, right? You and I, like I
Hmm.
have skin mites on me right now, but they're not bothering me because my immune system or whatever is keeping them in check. I'm full of bacteria and viruses, so are you, but we're fine because everything's in balance. Um, Fish are the same, and they go through the stress of transport. Their immune system gets stressed, and so it's very likely they'll have an issue. And this is why when little Johnny or Susie goes to the pet store to buy a fish, it looks healthy, but within a week or two, it's often dead because its immune system is compromised so much that those things take a hold. Um, and it's just been so highlighted to me seeing the data of what fish come in with that I would be either have a quarantine set up in my house so any fish I got, I could quarantine them, or well, that's ideal even if you do the second step, which I'm about to say, or find a pet store that does that. And there are more mom and pop shops that are starting to have quarantine facilities. There's a store. I was in Cincinnati giving a talk at the American Cichlid Association convention a little while ago, and there's a store there called Finspiration, and they were showing me around and stuff, and I was like, what I really want to know is, do you quarantine and how? And they're like, yes. And they took me to this back area, and I was like, awesome. It was all set up perfect. Just as a guy that's seen many, 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 many fish get examined and diagnosed, um, I think the best thing a hobbyist can do is try to find fish that are quarantined.
Yeah, and even then, getting fish from stores that do quarantine, you run a better chance, but it still is a really good practice to quarantine those fish
Oh
as
yeah,
well,
it's always
even in
better
your own
to
home setup.
quarantine at home. Yeah,
Yeah.
people.
Now that being said, I will run the risk sometimes and just throw them in the community tank. But I think it really depends on the source, though. Like Yeah, I've had some fun stories with mixing fish
Every
when I
now
should
and then
not.
I'll get
So
a comment. They'll see a comment on Facebook when someone's talking about Dan's fish, or in a YouTube chat or something that says, "Oh, I don't quarantine fish from Dan's fish," and I always start sweating a little bit because I know that we're not 100%. There's a bell curve there. The middle of the bell curve is very, very successful, but there is this tail end where there's gonna be a risk no matter what. So yeah, home quarantine. If you can get from a store that does it and have your own home quarantine, that's the best of both worlds. But let's talk about that a little bit. Sometimes the way people quarantine is they grab an empty tank or even like just a bucket or some kind of plastic, get the black plastic tote from Home Depot or whatever,
hmm
and throw the fish in. There's a lot of problems with doing it like that. If you're putting fish that are already a little bit stressed into an unstable system, sometimes I think the quarantine could do more harm than good. You're likely to get parameter
yeah,
fluctuations and ammonia spikes and things. If it's that black metal tote, I understand that we're trying to quarantine, but if you can't observe the fish closely, you're gonna miss all kinds of stuff. So my ideal quarantine tank is a tank that's been set up for a long time. It's stable. It's bioactive, meaning it has a nitrophine bacteria population in there that so you're not going to have ammonia spikes and nitrite spikes when you add new fish in it. You put them in there, and you can medicate or not, but put them in there for a few weeks and observe carefully. So
yeah. I feel like if you have to do the temporary tub route for your quarantine setup, get as try to let's say you've got a couple week head start. Run an extra sponge filter in your normal tank, right? Let that sponge filter that you're going to put in your quarantine tank, let it sit in your established tank. Let it get bacteria, let it do its thing, let it accumulate the biofilm and the junk inside of it. Let it season, right? And then maybe you've got an extra piece of driftwood. Move some of the seasoned items into this super sterile environment that you just set up, and maybe you do a water change and take half of your display tank's water and put it into this quarantine tank setup, so it's not just straight tap water that you hit with the chlorinator. So there's a little bit of something in there, a little bit of seasoning, and then also places for the fish to hide too. If you just throw it in an empty bin, give it a little something to hide. Let it kind of acclimate, let it hide, let it have its natural instincts. When we're collecting in Peru, so many epistogrammas, so many fish are just they're along the banks and they're in the little grass that grow. Like, they're not out in the middle of the channel. They're hiding. Like, if you take your dip net and just ram it into the roots that are coming out of the side of the bank or the creek, whatever you're in, or in the deep leaf litter, like, that's where stuff is hiding because they don't want to
yeah,
get hit. They don't
so
want to get
that's a
eaten.
good point too. Is that a bear tank is very stressful to fish that are already stressed. Yeah. So there,
hmm And now your bear tanks, I will say, so I see bear tanks in the background, but it's different at your kind of operation or a wholesaler because there's more fish in the tank, right? Some wholesalers will overcrowd, right? But that's at least more bodies. So they're like, oh, I'm next to a bunch of my buddies. Okay, it's a little crowded, but it is what it is. Where when you have more of a fish, so if you just get a couple fish and you put it in a big setup, that is like, oh man, this is a little too much, and
well,
I've got
we
nowhere to
you
hide,
don't see it
right?
in the few tanks you can see right here, but we do provide shelter for several species. So there's species you could put in a bear tank and they're not gonna care. But like I don't guppies, for example, they're just like feed me. Um, but there's a difference between a newly set up bear tank and one that's been set up forever and has algae on the walls and has
Yep.
stuff in there and it's painted on all the sides, so it kind of is cozy for them. But there's fish that, like for example CPDs, when those come in, we give them cover. Um, and within a
hmm
couple days they come out of the cover because we have them in big groups, so they're bold. But um, there are species that I think will benefit from some cover and some shelter and stuff and de-stress faster. And so we do that for the species that benefit from it.
Yeah. So, Dan, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the high level of the business. We haven't even gotten into your origin story, which I think maybe we'll just have to have a round two where we come on for origin story. Um, so, setting up in Sheridan, Wyoming, you've kind of said it's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
Although you do have a Starbucks. I was doing some Google Map playing around. You got things. You got a Walmart. You got stuff. And I actually drove through Wyoming on Interstate 80 coming up from Utah when I made the move from Idaho, and I drove with my oldest son to Kentucky, and so we stayed actually in Cheyenne
that's how
over
most people see
overnight on our
Wyoming.
road trip.
They
Um,
drive through it.
yeah. So the decision to set up your operation, knowing and the reason why I'm sitting in Lexington, Kentucky, and not in Washington is most people live east of the Mississippi in this country. Now, you and I are both West Coast boys, born in
Yep.
California. So we tend to think that like, oh man, there's got to be, 50-50 split, or most people here on the West Coast. No, they're east of the Mississippi. So in setting up your operation, was there ever a thought of doing the traditional and maybe relocating to Florida, or because there's pros and cons, right? And I think kind of immediately one of the thoughts is, well, I guess Dan never really has to worry about a hurricane wiping out his operation.
Yeah, that's a big
Charles
plus.
Clapsaddle has had to battle a couple hurricanes being outside of Houston. We have numerous operations in Florida that the plant farms that we deal with. Whenever there's a hurricane, they have to scramble for that week to get shipments out. Same thing with wholesalers. So I could see that being a big pro of short of Yellowstone, doing its thing and popping off, which that's going to affect the entire world. You don't necessarily have many major natural disasters to worry about other than maybe like a really, really, really big snowstorm in the wintertime.
Yeah, what we have here is winter.
Right.
So there are some cons to being here. So let me talk about the cons first, and then I'll talk about the pros. So big con is we are not a port of entry, and there's not one really close by. And so when we import fish, which I often do on my own import license, on my own accord, um, we can't get them cleared here in Wyoming. Another con is we are a little far flung, so shipping could be less if I was in a closer to a big hub for UPS or FedEx or something like that. So those are a couple of cons. Winter might seem like a con, but I don't think it is, and I'll explain why in a second. So ultimately, if I could find a place that was a port of entry and close to a hub, and I've thought of Tennessee a few times, um, then maybe that would be something in the future that we might consider. Right now, we're not close to that, but it's something that once we get to a certain volume, might make a lot of sense. The pros are this: believe it or not, winter is a pro. The problem with shipping out of Florida in the winter is if you're shipping to a cold area, you can't put the proper amount of heat in there because it will cook the fish on your side of the equation. But you can't not put a heat pack in there because it'll freeze the fish when they get to Minnesota, let's say. So people often think that our winters are a con. I think they're a pro. During the winter, I can ship to pretty much anywhere in the United States, and I'll be colder or as cold as them. So when I put in the heat packs, they're toasty the whole way, and I'm not overheating them here. If I ship to Florida, then I just put in a smaller heat pack. So the heat has dissipated by the time it gets down there. I know the temperatures here and in Louisville and wherever they're going, and so we can get the right heat pack for that situation. Same with cold packs.
Right.
Sometimes we use cold packs, but they're much less. Cold packs are much less necessary. Heat packs are needed, for the entire winter.
Hmm.
Cold packs are only needed if they're going somewhere really hot, or there's some kind of freak heat spell. So I think the cold's a plus. I think shipping from Florida would be difficult all winter long. The other plus is here, I am able to draw water from my local creek, sterilize it, clean it up, flow it through my tanks, collect it once it leaves my tanks, sterilize it, clean it up, cool it down, and send it back to the creek. So my fish are living in an extension of the creek. They get constant fresh water flow all day long. When you're attached to a natural waterway like that, there's a lot of regulatory agencies overseeing you, as there should be, because you do something wrong, you could endanger the natural waterway. You don't want to introduce an invasive species or some kind of disease or something. So it has to be done right. The thing about if I was trying to do this in California, having lived there and done some things there, is I know I would still be trying to clear the regulating process. Um, just because, not because their standards are a lot higher or anything, but because there's so much more delay in things when you're trying to build or get permits and licenses on the regulatory side. When I was living there, I just know the difference. Here in
Right.
Wyoming, there's about 500,000 people in the entire state. So we're basically a town with long streets. I personally know the people at the Department of Environmental Quality. I know the people at Fish and Game. I I don't know the people at the Army Corps of Engineers as well, but I knew what their concerns were. And so when I went to talk to them and clear the regulation, I could demonstrate to them, here's what I know you're worried about. Here's how the system I'm building is actually going to help the issue. So Department of Environmental Quality, for instance, they're worried about sediment clouding the water. They're worried about the creek getting too warm because in downtown Sheridan, which is downstream from me, they back in the day didn't plan it for creek health, and there's sections where it flows too shallowly and gets overheated. And they're worried about coliform bacteria, a bacteria in the water. And so I build a system that takes out sediment because I don't want that in my aquariums, sterilizes the water, kills the coliform bacteria they're worried about, and also cools the water before it's returned. So I was able to go in and say, I know these are concerns for you. I'm going to build a water treatment system to help fix that. I'm just going to keep fishing in that water treatment system.
And to back up, Dan, so we're talking about extracting water from the creek. Is this because Wyoming has like water rights? Is that why you're able to do this versus you're just hooked up to a shopping center's municipal water source, right? But that just basically turns a water meter like normal. You're actually taking from a creek because of something that Wyoming allows its citizens to do.
Yeah, so I have a water right to the local
Okay,
river or creek. Um,
gotcha.
and I'm able to use a certain amount. And we're non-consumptive use, so we're actually taking the
Right.
water and returning it. So we're not, having an impact on the amount of water in the creek. And when it's returned, it's actually in much better shape than when we took it out. Um,
Y-
so that regulatory environment's huge when you're trying to do something like I was trying to do. So that's a benefit. Um, I think those are the main things. And I already lived here, so
Right.
you know
Right. Yeah.
that was helpful.
Yeah, it's just, like Corey's story in Aquarium Co-op, like he lived in the greater Seattle area. That's why we started in the greater Seattle area because that's just where we lived. But, we just got to a point where it just made so much sense that one, we needed a new warehouse. We were busting at the seams. And so if we're going to do this, let's do the move that is going to set us up for future success.
Yeah.
So that's just where we were in that stage of the journey. So
I think that the two main benefits of being where you are, or Kentucky or Tennessee, is hub, middle of the state, and like UPS and FedEx hubs, middle of
mhm,
of the nation, not the state, and a port of entry. Those for me
yeah.
would be the big benefits because there might be some savings on shipping to customers. Although I have to say, for next day air, we did pretty good. Um,
UPS ground, we can hit. I think within a UPS ground 2 day, we're hitting like half of the country. It's insane. Like if we go up to UPS ground on 3 day, we're hitting 70% of the
yeah,
country. It is just absolutely insane. Where shipping out of Seattle, zone when we were with the Postal Service, zones 1 through 3, it was like, oh yeah, that's like down to Portland, and that's about it. And everything else is like max shipping cost, max shipping cost. So when we were looking at how we price products and looking at our shipping prices and all of that, anytime I would run an analysis, it's give me the zone 8 price, like because that's what we're assuming. We're assuming worst case scenario because we are so far away from most of our customers that on average it's going to be like a zone 7.5 cost, which zone 7.5 doesn't exist, platform 9 3/4, but hopefully people understand what I'm trying to say. Dan, so let's go through some of your fish. I would just want to nerd out on some of your stock list that you have right here. So Bloody Mary, Hill Stream Loach. Could you just give me like, I don't know, 1 minute little sales pitch on a couple of these fish that I'm going to call out? Because I love Hill Stream Loaches. I've never seen the Bloody Mary Hill Stream Loach, and that guy's cool.
Yeah, so the Bloody Marys we first got as a contaminant. I didn't know this fish existed. I brought in some zebra loaches and there were like 5 of these in there. And I was like, ooh, what's that? And so we started tracking them down. We were able to get some. So now we have a place we can get them. Um, they are very uncommon. It's not easy to collect them because of where they're located, and so for the foreseeable future, their price is going to be fairly high because of that. But you get a fish that has the normal hill stream endearing behavior, the UFO or the little stingray, however you want to describe them, but has bright color. And there's not that many of those available in the United States right now. Now, there are a bunch in the wild. And gradually, as those become more available, there's some with reds, there's some with iridescent greens on them, there's some with purples on them. And I think that in time, Hillstream loaches are going to become the new L number plecos as those become available. But these things have all the stuff you love about a Hillstream loach, plus bright color, and there's is hardy and easy to keep as a reticulated Hillstream loach. So
Yeah, they're beautiful. They have from the dorsal fin back, it's just a really bright red. You know, where a skunk would have its stripe, right? This thing's got a nice red stripe. It's really cool, and I absolutely love Hillstream loaches. I think that they're just such a fun fish. I love them for my boys because when they're on the front glass, you can see that little heartbeat,
yeah,
and it's just one of the coolest things ever. Like super fun fish.
there's nothing like them.
Um,
Nature's suction cups, like
all right, let's see here. Next one I'm going to go to Aphosimian volcanum.
yeah.
This one, I love dark fishes. I love dark colored fishes, and so this is a dark colored killifish, um, and it's just got some horizontal stripes of yellow and red. So it's got this mustard and ketchup thing going on, which probably isn't the best way to describe it, but super cool looking killifish, and I love the blacked out look with the red and yellow. So if you want to tell me a little bit more, Dan.
Okay, Aphyosemium volcanum is the subgroup of these fish is Chromaphosemians. These include these beautiful species like Volcanum, Poleaki, Bivitatum, and Bitaniotum's that have massively extended dorsal and anal fins and pointy tips on the tail. They have just about the best finnage of any freshwater fish you'll see. When they spread that fin out and display, it's absolutely stunning. And they do that often. I like Chromaphosemians so much that they're actually my logo. If you look at the logo for Dan's Fish, that is a
Hmm.
stylized silhouette of an Aphyosemian bivitatum funge that I actually have the picture on the website that I took that from. One of my males was displaying. I snapped a picture with one of those old power shots like 20, 30 years ago that had like 5 megapixels or whatever, and it turned out great. So I love this group of fish. They're super easy to keep. They're super hardy. They'll jump. So you need a tight fitting
Yeah.
lid. But besides that, especially Chromaphosemians, they'll coexist with many other small, peaceful species. So they go well in a community aquarium. There's kind of this thought that killifish have to be kept like this very specific way in their own tanks and all this. And it's just not true. There's lots of species like this one that do great in a community aquarium. They're eating dry prepared foods. We also give them frozen bloodworms and live baby brine shrimp and stuff like that, but they'll eat easily. And if you want to breed fish, killifish are some of the easiest fish to breed because the eggs are large, the eggs are tough, and when the fry hatch, they're big enough and already free swimming so they can take baby brine shrimp from the jump. You don't have to try to feed them like little paramecium or infusoria or super finely crushed flake foods that only a few of them are interested in. You can feed them live baby brine shrimp right away. And so,
Yeah, I had Gardner eye breeding in a I think it was like a 20 long on the top rack with a bunch of Java moss in there. I had Gardner eye doing well. I haven't had any success with any of the Achilles. What did I have? I think I had man, why is it escaping me? The AKA logo
Blue
killifish.
Glarus,
Yeah, blue Glarus.
how
There you
did you
go.
do it?
I tried it with peat moss, and I think I tried put the peat moss in a shallow Tupperware in a bare bottom tank. And so I tried that method. And I think my problem is I don't have the patience or I don't want to say precision, but the whole peat moss process just doesn't work with my personality, I guess. Like the whole pull the peat moss, and it's so subjective. Like, well, is this as wet as it should be when I put it in a Ziploc bag and put that in my closet? Should it be more dry? Like, I don't know. So, I like, and again, I'm a novice, amateur at best fish breeder. So
Well, I have good news for you,
yeah.
which is the blue Glarus doesn't have to go in peat moss. They're not an annual fish. You can water incubate the eggs. Same with the Aphyosemium volcanum. So killifish eggs are so tough that even the ones that don't have to be dry incubated in peat moss can be,
Hmm.
but it's not what they do naturally. In the wild, blue Glarus live in places where during the floody season, the rainy season, there's a lot of water, and so they spawn. And then in the drier season, it dries down but doesn't dry up usually.
Mm,
And so some of the eggs are in water all the time and just water incubate like normal. Some are up on the edges where the water levels dropped. And so those do go through a little diapause and hold on. And when it rains again, those might hatch. But
yeah.
you can just
I
water incubate them. Couple big things to help you with successfully water incubating eggs, whether it's killifish or rice fish or any eggs you pull, which is first wash your hands super well before you do it. Even before that, have them breeding in a fairly clean tank or a tank that's really stable. It doesn't have to be like sterile, but it needs to be, the water
Right.
parameters need to be good. Um, and then a couple things that really help. One is methylene blue really helps. Um, Acroflavin, if it's still around, that's an old favorite. But some kind of thing like that to kind of help the eggs not get fungus or bacteria.
Hmm.
And then you have to change that water frequently. The eggs are bioactive, they are respirating, they are synthesizing protein, which causes ammonia. And so it's very good to change that water, not because they're going to produce so much ammonia that it becomes toxic, but it will become food for microorganisms, and you don't want a bunch of microorganisms exploding in there. So that's the way I would suggest someone do fish if they want to pull eggs. But the easiest way, like that tank behind you, if that was half choked with Java moss floor to ceiling,
Hmm.
and you put blue Glarus in there and just left them alone, um, babies would appear if you fed by baby wind shrimp. Especially, I'm
Yeah.
assuming you were in Seattle when you tried it. I'm assuming
Yeah.
you had soft water. Yeah,
Very
so
soft water. Basically rainwater.
yeah, so that helps too. Sometimes if you have hard water, it can work, but other times you might run into fertility issues or calcification issues on the shell of the egg. So if you're trying to, if someone listening is trying to incubate blue Glarus eggs and you're having trouble, um, it might help to move them to soft water for incubation. So
Yeah, that's going to be interesting because the last time I had my tanks up, my fish room was in the greater Seattle area with incredibly soft, basically rainwater. Um, and then now, living here in the Lexington area, when I set up a fish room again, I'm going to have very hard
yeah,
water, very mineral rich water. So, you know, operating a fish room, working with some of like, because I'm still going to have like one of those 40 breeders I was telling you about is going to be dedicated to discus. Like I'm still going to have discus. I still want to breed those. And I think I'll always have a breeding project of discus going on. But, seeing now, like, okay, what is it like now with this whole new water supply that I'm using? How is that going? How is it going to change? What things are going to get easier? What things are going to get more difficult with different water quality or water parameters, I should say. All right, let's see here. We are bumping up on the 1 hour mark, but I would like to do. Let's see here. Da, 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 da. Tell me about dwarf red-tail eel. I know I caught one of your recent videos where you're like, "I got these back in stock. People love them." Why do people love these things? I'm not the biggest oddball fish guy. So sell me on dwarf red-tail
I
eel.
don't have to sell you; they sell themselves. This is the most requested fish.
Is it like a fire tail, the fire eels, but a smaller version of it?
So what we have here is one in this picture that's probably 4 inches long. The nice thing about these is they top out at 7. So a lot of people like fire eels and stuff, but they're tank busters. They get
Right.
massive. These guys stop at 7. They're aquarium bred and raised, which is awesome. There's a breeder in Europe that does these, and they've been working for a long time to get the red in the tail and the back half of the fish there as intense as possible. So there are a lot of species of eels in the wild that get to that 7-inch mark, but they're not aquarium bred and raised. This is the only one I know of that's this size that's available from a breeder. And they haven't worked the color in like these. Um, they also come every now and then a customer will say, I can't get these to eat anything but frozen bloodworms or brine shrimp. But that's like a super small exception. These come in ready to eat vibra bites and flakes and all that. They're used to aquarium life. Um, they're peaceful. You can keep them with other peaceful fish of an appropriate size. The only danger is something small enough for it to slurp up. It'll be active at night and it'll go do that. Because they're used to aquarium life, though, these are not nearly as shy as like your wild imported eels. They'll actually come up to the glass and beg for food. And wild imported eels will do that, but it takes a long, long time for them to get to that point. So, because of the color, because they're aquarium bred and raised, which means they're probably going to live for you, they're sourced more responsibly, and because they don't get too big, people love this fish. And I only know one place I can get it from, and they don't produce a lot of them. So
Mm.
I only have them available sporadically. So when we do get them, they often just sell out really quick. And then everyone that couldn't get them, that's where you see those comments of like, when are they coming back? And I'm like, I don't know. As soon as the guy has more.
Mm. Nice. Well, you've got, as of right now, you've got 5.
Mhm.
So somebody that wants these, jump on it right now while Dan's got them. All right, Dan. So again, I've taken up over an hour of your time. I really appreciate it. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with before we finish this interview? And I definitely would love to do a part 2 with you at some point if we could, to really dive into your origin story and talk more about your operation. And then I feel like it almost feels like we would have to go through what are your new things, and then we could talk about them again because talking about fish is fun.
Well, I'm game for coming back. It's been nice to meet you. Um, I want to shout out one fish before I go.
Sure,
It's
absolutely.
it's called the wild type wonder killifish. It's on the
Mm.
same row, probably right around the dwarf red-tailed eel. The
That was
reason
almost my pick, but then I was
that
like, I got to talk about the eel.
the reason this fish is special to me is I cut my teeth on killifish as a teenager back in junior high. That's the first group of fish I kept and bred and nerded out on. This fish is one that you used to be able to get back then. And I think it's beautiful with the reds and the iridescence and the vertical stripes. I like this one is called Aplicylus lineatus is the scientific name. Aplicylus dei is a similar one that I also like. But then what happened is a a color morph came out called the golden wonder killie. And that took the fish farms by storm. And you could no longer find this one, the wild form, after a few years of the golden wonder killie hitting the market because they all started producing the golden wonder killie. Now I like the golden wonder killie. It's the same species. It's just a color form of Aplicylus lineatus. And I like it, but it's a pretty uniform gold color with some red or orange on the tail. I think this is a much richer fish, and it killed me that I couldn't get it. So we found one breeder in Europe that has a few occasionally. I've been able to bring them in twice. I think the first time I got 5 pairs, and the second time 10 pairs. So 15 pairs in the 20 years I've been looking for this fish. It's hardy, it's easy to breed, it's as easy as the Golden Wonder, but it's unavailable. So I would love for people to get these. They're super expensive. They're $100 a pair right now because I had to bring them in from Europe. I could only get a couple. Um, this fish should be like 20, 30 bucks a pair. Back in the day, it was a staple of the killifish hobby, kind of like garden rye or something. You could
Right.
get this fish. And so for me, this is a huge nostalgia thing of this is a fish I loved back when I was a kid. Haven't been able to find it for a couple decades now. Finally got a few, and I'm very excited about them. So if you're an old killifish keeper who remembers the wild form of Aplicylus lineatus, and you can breed fish, please get them, please breed them, and let's distribute them and get the price point back down to something that's reasonable. That's something I'm super excited about.
It doesn't make any sense, and I'm guessing no with your business model for you. It would probably have to be a passion project where you're like, I'm gonna take this. Let's just say it's this, Aplicylus lineatus. Like, I'm gonna just keep these three pairs that you have, like me. I'm Dan now, and I'm just gonna work with them, and I'm gonna let them breed, and I'm gonna raise that up. Does that just completely demolish the business model that you have right now? Like, short of it being a passion project for you, that wouldn't feed into the business.
There's a few fish we breed right now because they take no work.
Hmm.
Like for a long time, we did Zophophorus milleri for about 3 years, I think, 2, 3 years. We had a population that they were so prolific that they were just continually spawning. Um, but if a fish takes effort, I can't do it right now.
Right.
It'll demolish the business model. But more than that, doing what we do, we're already working super long hours. I'm
Sure.
still on the treadmill, you
No,
know.
no,
Um,
no worries. No worries.
Eventually, though, what I would like to do, it doesn't make direct business sense, but what I'd like to do with my YouTube channel eventually, when I'm freed up enough to be able to breed fish regularly again, is set up some breeding racks, breed killifish and others, and make very detailed videos about each process and how it's done. Not that that would bring in like the direct breed them, sell them, that's not going to make money.
Right.
But it'll be, I think, useful. And I think the way to market these days is to be useful to people, to provide value. And so I think that kind of information will be helpful for people that want to breed these fish. And so I think, there's a circuitous route of through a marketing channel, so to speak, that I could justify doing it. And that's what
Yeah,
I
no,
hope to do soon.
yeah, I love the breeding setup video, and I've told Corey that some of my favorite stuff of our Aquarium Co-op content is just where, it's the check-ins with his breeding projects that he was working on. Here's how it is this week. Here's how it is this week. I really, really do enjoy that kind of content. And so if you start producing that kind of stuff, I think that's awesome, and I think should do well for anybody that likes playing with fish and breeding fish.
My favorite channels are like Mark's Aquariums, where it's a guy out in England that
Oh
has
yeah,
a
yeah,
few
yep,
tanks and
loaches.
does
Yep.
very detailed videos on here's how you spawn a neon tetra, and I'm like fascinated. you
Yeah.
know,
Oh, is that a different Mark from? I'm thinking of Mark Dufel
you're probably thinking
in
of a guy
England.
that does shrimp.
Mm.
I'm thinking of
I
there's
think I've seen.
Mark's
Oh
Aquatics
well.
and Mark's Aquariums, and I get them confused
Okay.
if I
All
remember
right.
right. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I digress. All right, buddy. Well, Dan, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Everybody, please go to dansfish.com. The fish that we were talking about in detail were his newest arrivals. They're in very limited quantities right now. The ones that we were talking about in particular, I think they're amazing. Dan has 280 some species available right now, so jump on there. I'm sure you'll find something. I have a neighbor that can attest to the quality of Dan's fish, and my good buddy Corey can attest to the quality of Dan's fish and his shipping method. So I would say check out Dan, support him, check out his YouTube channel, and stay tuned for part 2 at some point in the future where Dan and I connect again.
Yeah, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.